Good morning and welcome to today's Euractiv debate on sustainability reporting and assurance. We'll be asking whether it is a burden or an opportunity for EU competitiveness. I'm Jennifer Baker. I will be your moderator this morning. Now, we all know, since we're here today, that as part of its efforts to increase European competitiveness, the European Commission introduced earlier this year the so-called Omnibus package, the simplification package, in February 2025. And this covers, of course, several areas we're going to be talking about today: sustainable finance moves, due diligence reporting, and the carbon border adjustment mechanism. But specifically, we're going to be looking at corporate sustainability reporting directive. And today's event is supported by the TIC Council, that is the Testing, Inspection and Certification. So we're going to hear about what TIC companies can bring to the table and how they could operate in this sector. So we'll talk about the big obligations, the big opportunities, and a little bit more about that. Of course, we want your thoughts and questions for our panelists as well. You can do that using Slido. The code to enter into your screen is simplification, or you can scan the QR code there that you see. You will also see, for those in the room, that there are QR codes around the room. So please put your questions to our panelists during our discussion, and time allowing, we'll get as many of them to them as possible. So, with no further ado, I will introduce you to our great speakers today. We have joining us from the Cabinet of Maria-Luisa Albuquerque, the European Commissioner for Financial Services, Savings and Investments Union, Elena Alvarez, who is responsible for sustainable finance portfolios since December 2024 and previously was at DG FISMA, and her expertise is on sustainability reporting, so looking forward to your thoughts. We also have joining us from the European Parliament, Adrian Vázquez-Ladara from the EPP and a member of the jury committee, and who was the shadow rapporteur on CSRD under the previous mandate, so we'll also be able to bring the Parliament perspective to us. Joining online, we are delighted to have Gemma Sanchez-Danes, who is Director and part of the EFRAG Sustainability Reporting Leadership Team. And last but not least, we have here in the room, willing to bring a lot of views from the TIC community, Geraldine Picot, who is Chief Executive Officer of SGS, which is the leader in the TIC industry. So thank you all very much for being here. Let me start, Elena, with you. Give us a few opening words, set the scene, and draw the outline for our audience today about what we're talking about from the Commission perspective.
Thank you so much. Well, I think coming back to the title of this conference, whether sustainability reporting is an opportunity for EU competitiveness or not, I think the answer is clear. At least from the Commission perspective, that's why we've kept the goals of this legislation, why we haven't touched the substance or the critical elements, but we are rather focusing on simplification. To us, it's very clear that this means a competitive advantage in the medium run for European companies. And that also means that even if, for example, we have proposed to reduce the scope of the reporting obligations, we do expect that not only those companies in scope will keep reporting, there will be other companies voluntarily doing so because they do see this positive effect in the medium term and this competitive advantage, as we say. So I think the focus on simplifying, it's key. We recognize things might have gone a bit too far in the past. Timing was also not ideal because, as you know, we were under a lot of pressure, all of us, including also from the EFRAG community, who helped us with the technical advice. So I think that at the moment, this refocus, this also geopolitical changes that have taken place have kind of pushed us a bit to realize that things could be improved and further streamlined in a way and simplified. And in that regard, we do expect and we do hope we deliver what the industry is also expecting so that we can focus on the core information that's actually needed, especially for investors. And then we can also enable this capital flow towards companies that are doing this effort and that are finding solutions to the environmental and social problems that we face nowadays in the EU.
Thank you, and I'm sure we'll come back to touch on many of these elements. I know one of the things we hear very often from the Commission is that simplification does not mean dropping standards, so we can touch on that. Adrian, let me come to you. How did we get here? Give us your thoughts on where we're at now, and we'll then move on to future in open further rounds.
How we got here? I mean, I think I have invested 4 of my last years in these files, and it's not been easy, and it seems that it's a never-ending story. So we'll see where we're going to get in the upcoming weeks. I'm going to take something on what Elena said, that in the past maybe the Commission was too ambitious. The only thing is that past is 18 months ago. So that's not like a big pass. It's like the day before yesterday. And that's a problem because it means that there have been things that haven't been done in a pragmatic way. There have been legislation that has been put through without actually considering the impact in several sectors. There had been legislation that has been put to the Parliament only based on ideological standards and not on impact analysis that could have been done in a different way, in my opinion. And that's why we are where we are. And this is the other thing. Now, let's see, because we are trying to push. I think the Commission did good on this stop the clock proposal. The problem is this instability we have in the Parliament. And how are we actually going to make this happen? And I'm always positive, but I'm very realistic. And we have a really complicated calendar in the upcoming weeks. And the most problematic of all of this is it's just the first Omnibus package. We have 5 more coming. And if this goes south, this is going to have enormous political consequences, both at Commission and Parliament level. And then last but not least, it was not only the Commission, also the Parliament. Well, we did what we could. I was shadow rapporteur, and it is true that I wasn't very happy with the outcome, but I was part of a majority, and in that sense, I'm quite responsible. But then we have the Council, and we saw how 2 main political parties and governments in the Council previous mandate, they were pushing and pushing and pushing for 2 years, and 15 days before the deadline, they completely changed their position, which is something that I still don't understand. How could they be so irresponsible doing so? So let's see what happens now if this gets to the Council, because if everything goes well in the Parliament, that we'll discuss this later, we need to finalize trialogues by the end of the year. And now I finish, because the problem with this is more than the power game we are having here in Brussels with this regulation, is how we affect companies. And we are actually building a cage for our companies, a cage that they are going to be very complicated for them to be outside. And that is going to affect heavily their margins, and that is going to affect heavily their competitiveness, something that has been actually demanding for 2 years. And now we're trying to do something quick and fast just because of political pressure, when on the first step we should have done it better.
Well, I sense your frustration, and to an extent, you get a lot of pressure from business saying, we want regulatory certainty, we want it now, so go faster, but then at the same time you rush through a law that isn't properly assessed, and then you're going too slow or you're going too fast. So you're damned if you do and you're damned if you don't. But tell us, Gemma, let's come to you. Tell us what has been the role of EFRAG, what are you working on, and your opening thoughts, please.
Thank you, and good morning. I cannot be there with you today. So EFRAG, we actually work for the Commission. We prepare the technical advice that then is handed to the Commission, to DG FISMA, so Elena's team. And the requirement has been to prepare an European set, autonomous set, if I could say like that, of reporting standards. So the decision was not to actually endorse the international ones, to make them European specific. So why is reporting important? Well, because reporting and transparency, it's a prerequisite to sustainability for companies to actually showcase what they are doing on this particular area. So it's not an end in itself, but a mean to an end. And following what we were just hearing, we have this new mandate on simplification. I think it's welcome. It's welcome by the different stakeholder groups that we have at EFRAG. We cannot lose the sight that having a uniform landscape rather than a fragmented and voluntary one on non-financial or sustainability information is important. And that's why for the past 2 years, and even more, 3, we have actually worked on these standards. We've done 3 public consultations. The Commission has done an additional 1. So sharing that with the European constituents have been absolutely at the key of what we do. And as a matter of fact, yesterday, we closed the amended ESRS public consultation, where we have more than 700 respondents, and we have done more than 40 outreach events. So again, we are really looking forward to hearing what the constituents in Europe are saying, and how we could actually make this simplification now that we have one chance to make it work.
Thank you, Gemma. And Geraldine, just for the last of the opening remarks, set the scene for us, make the case for the TIC companies, why we're all here discussing this today under this umbrella.
Okay, thank you, and I'm very happy to be here with all of you. I'm Geraldine Picot. Can you hear me well? Is it working? Yes? Now it is working. So I was just thank you for having me today. I am Geraldine Picot. I'm the Chief Executive Officer of SGS. SGS is an unknown company in an unknown industry, which is TIC, testing, inspection, and certification. But an industry which exists for more than a century in many cases. We are there helping the industries to test the products in order to make sure they are safe and that people can trust and use the product without harming the consumers. We are inspecting sites and we are certifying. What means certifying a management system? What is a management system? I'm going to be very concrete because this is what we do. We work with companies on a B2B, on B2C, business to consumer as well. We come to effectively audit the management system, which is a set of policies, of procedures, of manuals that ensure the impact, the objectives, whether this is sustainability objectives, like with ISO 14000, or the energy objective, which is ISO 50,000, and that this is effectively corresponding to the impact that we want to achieve. And this, you know what, we do it since 1947. These standards have increased year on year. The standards on energy have been renewed in the 90s to go into effectively efficient energy measures, renewable energy, what we call scope 2, but you have also scope 3. We're doing supply chain audits for years, and we effectively instrumental when it comes to have an impact on climate, on nature, on circularity, which is, by the way, the Impact Now program SGS has set to help companies. So we are very concrete. And we can do, through our 100,000 employees, which are PhDs, which are technical people, the technical audit that as a citizen you're expecting. What you are expecting is to have a real impact on climate. And people that know what they're talking about, subject matter experts, are going to say, yes, this is really reducing the CO2 emission, because yes, they have changed, the way they're taking this energy. It's waste instead of fuel, and so on and so forth. And the supply chain has been effectively certified. And yes, we have the impact we're expecting. And I think it is important because we're talking about the credibility of the of Europe here. So I think it's high time we leverage what we have. And we make sure that we really give the right objective to investors, but to consumers as well, which are becoming more and more aware about effectively having a real impact when it comes to people and the planet. So that's in a nutshell who we are.
Thank you very much, Geraldine, and I'm sure we'll draw on that expertise through this conversation. Let me come back again, Elena, to you. Tell us about what the impact of sustainability reporting is on investment, because we talk about competitiveness, we talk about the need for investment. What makes double materiality reporting essential? Give me that perspective, please.
Well, in the last month, we have seen the first reports, for instance, according to the new ESRS, according to the new CSRD requirements. And for example, the feedback we got from or the studies that one can see from different investor groups or from the Big Four is that investors are really grateful that indeed now information is standardized and the methodologies are common and shared. On the other hand, they've also found as a problem, as an issue, the high volume of disclosures, because indeed it's a bit more difficult to find what's actually relevant and material for a given company, and what do the company itself see its risks or its opportunities, for instance. But it did show a good trend in terms of availability of information. So I think what's very clear is that information needs to be out there for investors to make informed decisions. So in that regard, the sustainable finance framework has helped a lot, and we've seen that in the past years, not only with the CSRD, which has just kicked in, but we did have before the non-financial reporting directive, which indeed was an ideal because of the principles-based nature and the different approaches that different companies had. But we also have, for some years now, the SFDR, which we are going to revise also this year, by the way. And that has also shown that almost half of the asset management market is investing in products that claim to be sustainable. And that's because there is that appetite from end investors. So the availability of reliable information is crucial. And in this point, of course, assurance plays a very big role. And that's why in the original CSRD proposal, the assurance requirement was a must. And that was never doubted, because if the information is out there but it's not reliable, it kind of defeats its purpose. So I think that the availability of standardized, reliable information where everyone agrees on what each element means, let's put it this way, has been keen in the recent months, and it will continue to be so. So again, I think this push is coming very much from the investor community, also from the past years, and double materiality as well, because even from investors that aren't like impact investors or ESG-focused investors, they still tell us they want to be able to conduct a proper due diligence process on their investments, on their investee companies. And in that regard, they also see the medium to long-term risk of certain impacts. So again, if you look at things only from a financial materiality perspective, the time horizon that you analyze might be too short to basically be able to identify potential risks that might come in the future. So maybe it's a matter of time horizons rather than on substance, because I think it's perfectly understood that if there is a high nature degradation, for instance, that will hit us back financially to our economic ecosystem. So the time horizon plays a role, and in this regard, investors, much many than we think, would agree that the double materiality approach is interesting from that angle. So I think this is something that has come to stay, and that's why this was never put into question in the proposal, and it's retained there at the moment.
Gemma, let me bring you in on this same question. What impact does sustainability reporting have on investment levels?
Sure. So, I mean, we do have some academic research that actually shows that sustainability, where you are prioritizing the long-term goal over the short term, will actually bring more resilience and value creation to companies. And this is something that is very important. Even the ISSB, that is only looking at financial materiality, they have recognized that impact information, so impact materiality information, is important for investors. And I'm referring to the traditional investor that is only maximizing profit and may not be that keen to consider impact matters. So this is a reality, and that's why from its conception, impact materiality was assessed as pre-financial materiality. So what the impacts are today, as Elena was saying, you will have the financial effect in the medium and the long term. And of course, there's going to be uncertainty. Maybe it's difficult to calibrate exactly the range of the financial effect, but it will be there. So when we also talk to financial analysts, so let me move from academics to financial analysts. The key thing that they do is actually do valuations of companies. And one of the key assumptions that they have to make is the terminal value. So the value at perpetuity. In order to make that assumption of the terminal value that sometimes, has a very significant effect on the value of the company, they need some assumption. And it's actually this impact information on climate, for example. If you are an oil and gas company, are they going to have unproductive or stranded assets in the oil rigs, right? Will this business be there in 50 years' time? And it's actually the impact information that will tell us that. So this is actually also very key from investors, and I'm referring to traditional investors. We all know that Europe is the continent with the highest increase in temperatures because of global warming. I think that's scientifically proof. So maybe some people still think that climate risk or sustainability could be thought as an opportunity, but to be honest, maybe for the rest it's a necessity. So investors want to know how the business will make profit in 5 years' time, but also how we will manage the transition and ensure a soft landing.
Adrian, just there's a quick question in here from Charlotte online asking, can you please clarify which law you're referring to when you mentioned regulation being rushed, the CSRD or the proposed changes to the CSRD as part of the Omnibus package? And a reminder, if you do have questions for our panellists, put them on the Slido.
I mean, the whole proposal, I think it lacks some factors that you have to include when you propose legislation. And I'm going to take on something that Gemma said. I understand that we have to go through that sustainability reporting. I understand that we have to be more ambitious with companies to actually give more information outside. And also I understand that we have to go towards to try to manage and keep our agreement with the Green Deal and so on. Of course I do. But sometimes when you legislate, you don't do the things that you want to do. You do the things that you can do. Because if not, the short or medium term effects on society, they're going to bring down the whole castle. And it's amazing how some people are still talking about climate change when they don't understand that if you want to move forward 40 years in 5 years of regulation, the pendulum effect you're going to have from society is going backwards 50. And you just have to see elections everywhere. So when you legislate, you are not just a bureaucrat. You have to include social aspects to it. And I'm so tired. I have had this discussion now in the Parliament. One of the dangers of this legislation is that there are political groups that they still don't understand in what world they live. If you push too hard on these issues, and this has been happening in the last 15 years, you start giving power to people who really don't want and don't think and don't believe on climate change. And then it's worse. And let me throw you some numbers, Gemma. Check who is winning elections since 2009. You think it's people that they are aligned on this like I am, or people that is not? So if we continue pushing and pushing and pushing on this, we are going to wake up in 5-10 years' time, and this whole thing is not going to be here. So we need more rationality. And we, understanding the goals, we have to understand that politicians and legislators, we can't do whatever we want when we want. We have to do it when we want. And I'm sorry, but I'm going to quote Lenin, and I'm from the EPP. You have to be ahead of the citizens, of the population, and lead them, but only one step. If you go too far, the whole thing starts to shamble.
Well, Adrian, I mean, I have a quote here from you saying that we all share the goal of a more sustainable Europe, but it cannot come at the cost of our competitiveness on the global stage. So let's come back to that question that I had asked the ladies before. What is the impact of that sustainability reporting on investment?
Well, if you see the numbers, and this is Commission numbers, I think per year, only in compliance, European business, they're going to spend 4.2 billion. 4.2 billion in compliance is 3.5% of the Spanish GDP. Are we going to bring in, thanks to that non-financial information, 4.2 billion in investment? That's my first question. Then the second one, if we are actually bringing down all these compliance to SMEs, it's going to at least cost them 5% of their margin. I don't know about your countries. In Spain, it's a SME country, and many margins of many SMEs, they are a little bit below double digits. And then last but not least, if this is so good for everyone, the problem is that what we are doing is, again, putting our own companies engaged in the world landscape that is not very stable nowadays. So, again, I agree that this is the direction we have to go. But let's start with those companies that for them is manageable. If you take big companies, from listed companies, the average they spend in compliance is 1.2, 1.5 million euros, which is something they can manage. But don't bring down in a cascade still, because what you are doing is jeopardizing all our companies. And last but not least, we're in a world where production is based on the East and innovation is based on the West. What are we going to have left for us?
Well, I think despite the best wishes of Mr. Draghi, we are an SME continent rather than worrying about an SME country. Geraldine, let me come to you and ask then I presume you're agreeing with what you've heard from some of the colleagues here on investment levels, but what would be then the benefits of opening the market to independent assurance services providers? Bring the conversation forward.
I think it represents a great opportunity to do this reset that we have to do, because it's, to me, I think no doubt we need to continue to have a reporting on our impact on climate, on adding circularity would be a good thing, by the way, as we have to become a more circular economy. But we have to do it in a more pragmatic way. 1,000 data points, and I'm chairwoman of the audit committee of Danone, by the way, and so I know what happened and what CSRD have implied for companies, even the big listed one. So it is. Look, we lost there. We had a business that's been monopolized by Big Four, who has made it a complex accounting reporting. Sorry to say, it's not. We have to really rethink it to make it really impactful and really meaningful, because Europe had an advance with CBAM, with measures to really have a say here, and had a political mission on internationally, which I completely subscribe and want to advocate. So I think that opening, becoming more pragmatic, having the KPIs that matters, measured by people that understand what a supply chain is, biologists, biochemists, these guys that are on site, on the field, that are subject matter expert and can say, here you need to really measure methane out of the farm. Here you need to really measure CO2 emitted out of the kiln of the plant. And these are the measures that we need to have done by subject matter experts, and that are going to be shown in a reporting that are going to center in what really matters. I think we need to have this pragmatism that I do believe TIC company has, because as I said, we're doing management system certification for decades. So we have these experts and we can leverage that. And having us, being able to certify the reporting, the non-financial data reporting is a good thing. It's opening the market. It forces the Big Four to share and also to simplify. And also it is not all this crazy amount of additional cost because they all tripled their budget. It will lower the cost for companies. And SMEs today, they already do ISO certification, so ISO 14. So it's not necessarily that much of an add-on cost to bridge the gap and say, you know what, well, you do that, and on top, you do this reporting, and if there is a Big Four audit, I'm fine. There's place for everybody, but let's becoming much more pragmatic. And let's not to try to do a balance sheet, a P&L, and why not a free cash flow based on climate or things that are completely disconnected from what the industrial life and the supply chain is about. I think we have to kind of really bridge and open it and being more pragmatic here. Really, it's a must, and I really advocate here for Europe. I'm a European. ISO's been created in Europe, so I think we have great assets here to continue to become, the continent of reference when it comes to sustainability.
Well, I see related to that we have a few questions coming in from our audience regarding data and the importance of data, and we'll come on to that in just a moment. But Elena, I want to come to you because we have companies saying, as Adrian said, that sometimes reporting is too expensive, but also it can be extensive, it can be complex, it can be not time efficient. Is it even focusing on the right elements that actually make up a company's sustainability footprint? So, I'm just wondering, without getting into competition elements, which I know is not your remit, but what might be the benefits of opening the market to ISPs, or how can the Commission ensure that there's a sort of a plurality of options out there?
Well, in the original CSRD, co-legislators, and this came from the Parliament, already pushed very much to open the market to independent assurance services providers. So that's already in there. Of course, this is a choice for the company, and I think it was very good that was the conclusion of the proposal back in the day, because of course there's always an element of cost that companies would have to assess. There are inevitable synergies if the same auditor does the financial audit and the sustainability audit. But again, for certain aspects, it might make more sense to have someone a bit more specialized indeed. And again, we do open for the competition in the sense that it will be also a price competition issue, right? So in that regard, I think the framework already allows for that open competition. whether there are issues today with regard to the Big Four or not, that's a different story indeed that I'm not going to get into because it's not under my commissioner's remit. It's really about competition. But I think the CSRD took the right steps in the right direction to allow for those actors to also be a part of the story.
Adrian, your thoughts on this question of ensuring that there is a diverse options out there for SMEs or indeed bigger companies?
Well, we have to see yet where we're going to land, if we land. So, this is the thing. Now we have to go through the political game of this. And just to put you an example, I mean, some left groups, they are still tabling amendments that the Council disregard previous mandate. And they're still pushing on that. And then the second one, you have to see the electoral calendar. I think SMEs are not going to be happy around Europe, right? So the problem with this, I'm sorry for being so political, it's what I am. But if you see the calendar we have, we need to push this as soon as possible to give response to those SMEs and to those companies. Because we have this stop the clock, but if we don't manage to have an agreement in December, then the directive is going to start to be applicable to many companies that they don't know what to do. Should they build in-house all the compliance? Should they start now? Should they don't? They are in an insecurity that is amazing that we are actually doing that. And this is something that also amazed me, because when you see all this regulation that we did previous mandate and the Commission mainly proposed, and then now we launch this SMEs shield. So we are building an SMEs shield from ourselves. So defending this, so it's like bipolar kind of. But now going to the nitty-gritty on this, we are trying heavily, and the EPP is trying heavily to actually land an agreement with the pro-European forces. I think Jorgen Warborn is doing an excellent job. I'm in the working group with him. We are in a small group of MEPs dealing with this. But just to put you an example, we understood that those who were involved in the file previous mandate, we should not be leading the negotiations because we need fresh air. Who did the socialist group put again to negotiate? Not only that, when are we having elections in the Netherlands? October 23rd or 29th, and we are supposed to pass this through Parliament on October 23rd. What do you think the socialist rapporteur is going to do during the elections on this file? What is she going to promise? That she's actually in Timmermans' party. So all this data, we have to take it into account. And that's a huge problem, because I know what the Dutch Socialist Party is going to say during the elections on CSDD and CSRD. And I know this is going to derail the negotiations. So before replying to your questions, the thing is this going to happen? We are trying our best. We are trying to keep that majority because, and I finish, plan B is to scrap the whole thing, which is something that I don't want, because I really think that we have to go through this road. But maybe we have to do it in a much more pragmatic way.
I'm going to come back to you at the very end of this discussion, Adrian, for some ray of sunshine from you, because it's at the moment feeling rather gloomy, your outlook. But Gemma, let me come to you now and talk about an ideal world. What would be the ideal guidelines for companies to conduct voluntary reporting and assurance so that it remains affordable for organisations of all sizes, those SMEs? What are your thoughts on that? And I am aware that we're going to talk about this data question as well.
Sure. Well, the only thing I could say, and it's the feedback that we have received, because obviously it's not our role to work on the audit standards for the European Commission, is that the auditors have played a key role in 2024. Part of this is because they have actually understood the ESRS as a compliance exercise. So rather than what we know in financial reporting, which is a fair presentation framework. So I think that probably in here, one of the important points is actually to educate, maybe, get some further experience within the auditors, because this is actually the pressure that, day in, day out, the people in the finance team suffer. And especially when it comes to impact materiality. So double materiality is key. I think that we've all agreed in this roundtable that this is not negotiable, but actually applying it for auditors that may be coming from financial reporting side maybe is a little bit different. So I think that's probably where you probably need more guidance, so companies are not feeling this pressure.
Geraldine, same question to you. What are your thoughts on potential guidelines for voluntary reporting?
I think, well, what Gemma is acknowledging is that we need subject matter experts to help to effectively create some trust into the data and the selected data that we are going to report and certify, whether it's an auditor or a TIC company, a testing, inspection, certification company that's going to effectively sign the report. That is what matters. We need trust in this. We need absence of bureaucracy, of concepts that are too far from the topic. We need to restore that confidence and that trust into these reportings. And it's not by having an extensive number of data points that we're going to restore the trust. I think, again, we need to streamline it, to go to the point, and effectively to also have a bit of faith in the industries. Solutions often come from the industries themselves. So I think, we have to guide on the framework. We need to put and let them choose who they want to have their non-financial data certified, knowing that, yes, Big Four can do it, and yes, testing and inspection and certification company can do it as well. And it allows more competitiveness. It allows, more competition. So the cost is going to be much lower, which is what the companies want, because they want that to be embedded into their management certification system, into their process procedures, and then leading to effectively, this is my impact of all the actions, all the process procedures I have in place that have showing my progress when it comes to climate, nature, or circularity. So it is very key to report. I think it's very key to keep that, but we have to simplify it, open it, and that will restore more transparency as well and more trust in what and the pragmatism and the credibility of what we want to achieve here and what we want to do.
I have a question here from Raquel Costa from Schneider Electric for the whole panel, but possibly Elena, I'll start with you. Raquel is asking, how will we ensure that the Omnibus is not reducing the data availability, which is key for investors, as you highlighted, and how does this match with exempting 80% of companies from reporting plus limiting data requests, the value chain gap? And would you like to tackle that? How do we ensure this data availability?
Sure. Well, I think it's clear that we cannot control what companies will voluntarily do. So I'm not going to claim that every company is going to continue reporting voluntarily. But as I said, the expectation is very high. And we will also find from those companies that do need the funding, the willingness to provide the information. We will also find the willingness not to reply to 100 different questionnaires from different investors, right? So one of the reasons for the CSRD was also to have one single standardized reporting way so that these questionnaires would be either reduced or completely scrapped in a perfect scenario. So I think that hope and that idea would promote and motivate many companies to voluntarily provide the same information as per the standards in terms of methodology, in terms of data points, et cetera, But of course, it's uncontrollable if everyone will continue reporting or not. Again, there might be different cases, private investors, equity, public markets. It would really depend. A company that is in need of funding, a company that is not. So again, it's true that there might be a bit of an issue that's, I think, unavoidable to recognize, but we do count with many companies voluntarily reporting. And as regards the shield or the cap or however we want to call it, this would be, again, let's see what co-legislators agree, but this would be in the context of the CSRD reporting. It's not so much in terms of private contractual relationships that might occur between suppliers, clients, or even with investors. So again, if an investor needs certain information for its own risk management purpose or whatever purpose it is, there would still be room for requiring that information from the investee companies.
Thank you, and thank you, Raquel, for the question. Let's move a little bit broader, because I'm seeing questions regarding the impact overall on Europe's economy. So perhaps let me go to you, Geraldine. Can you give us some concrete examples of the ways in which the revision, assuming we all have it at the end of the year, if it's possible, CSRD can strengthen Europe's economy?
I think obviously CSRD, the way it was done initially, would not necessarily strengthen. I think the Omnibus is definitely demonstrating the need for massive simplification compared to the initial, reporting request that was made. And that's a good thing, because we need to save it. We need to save it, and we need to make it therefore much simpler and much more to the point. Companies, industries, we're talking about voluntarily, they do that a lot with assurance, with the standards, with our guy, again, or technicians. It's a technical audit, it's not a financial audit. It's a technical audit, because we're not talking finance to start with. We're talking about industrial processes, supply chain, all the process and procedures a company put in place in its organization to reach its sustainability objectives. And therefore, the assurance, the voluntary disclosures have to be put into the equation. They're there, and they are fulfilling the goal. So why don't we leverage that, incorporate it into the simplification that we are going through with CSRD and Omnibus, and leveraging already what we have and what the companies are already spending, to become better when it comes to sustainability. Look, they're doing that. Why? They're doing that also because they are consumers, their clients, because we're talking a lot about investors. But yes, that's one group of stakeholders, but let's not forget the consumers. Let's not forget the clients, B2B, B2C. There is more and more awareness about how I consume, what do I use, what are the emissions linked to it, what is the climate impact for people, for the planet. And this is why companies do a lot of voluntarily declaration, efforts, and reporting. So I think we just have to build on that. Again and again, I will keep repeating that, because I think we have, also to promote this for SMEs. It is very important. They do already this work, and we haven't really taken that into account enough. And opening again the market to testing, inspection, certification will be the first step to acknowledge and showcase these efforts into the framework that Europe will define under Omnibus. So I think we can link it and save it. But it is important for the competitiveness, because I don't think by having a burden of hiring sometimes 20 guys at all departments to do these reportings, to do these questionnaires, it's so disconnected from the life of the company sometimes. We really need to change that. Again, it's not purely financial. And I have a financial background. I know what I'm talking about. I started my career in the Big Four, so I exactly know what I'm talking about. But I think it is important to, to embed that into what the company is doing, reinforcing, but not adding something completely disconnected on top, and for data that's not relevant to the business that the company is itself doing. And that is key to have this competitiveness fully in motion.
Well, when we talk about competitiveness, which is a word thrown around all the time, it's the absolute buzzword in Brussels. I mean, we ask, what are we competitive with? Who are we competitive with? And I'm seeing questions coming in about how Europe competes globally. So I'm seeing here a question from Rakesh Vazariani saying, if China can utilize public disclosure environmental data based on PRTR, utility bills, waste data, etc., to automate its environmental performance, could the EU or utilize or scale in the same way to ease the burden? Also, Rakesh again pointing out that India, as part of the upcoming free trade agreement with the EU, has mandatory ESG disclosure and reasonable assurance for a section, and it allows technical auditors and TIC companies. So do you think the EU should consider sort of alignment or interoperability in this area? You're nodding, Geraldine, so I'll let you take it first, but I'll come to each of the rest of you as well to get that sense of where we fit globally.
I do think we need to be consistent. I mean, some countries in Europe allow it, so we can do it. We can certify non-financial data. Some countries don't allow it inside Europe. So let's start by Europe and making it clear that we can participate, and it is the company to choose who's best to certify the non-financial data reporting. The simplified one, whatever we will come out with, we are there to help and make it happen as well. But let's open the market once for all in all countries. So we can do it in France, we can do it in Spain, we can't do it in Germany. Well, let's kind of have it everywhere. That would be the first step. And you're right, in India we can do it. In Hong Kong we've certified and done it as well. So there's a lot of countries in the world, in Asia and elsewhere, that are taking example from Europe. And we still have this leading example, which is a strong political, I think, message that we have to deliver the world. So let's keep that advance. Let's be consistent. Let's have it set up everywhere in Europe so that other countries can effectively apply it and not a la carte like it is today. Yes, in India, yes, in Hong Kong, no, there, yes, there. I think we have this role of example in Europe, and I think we should get there. Yes, definitely.
So, Elena, let me come to you. Rakesh is mentioning these other sorts of mandatory ESG disclosure, reasonable assurance, talking about things like the pollutant release and transfer register. What can we do to think about all of these different elements and make ourselves competitive as Europe, and are we on the right track with that?
Well, I think... this is too close now. I think we're indeed in the right track in that regard, because we're taking into consideration all these international developments, just as we are also taking into consideration what's happening with the ISSB and the need for interoperability between the standards. So international convergence is clear. It's a clear objective as well, and all of these developments are taken into account. For instance, for the assurance requirement to non-EU companies that are in the scope of the directive, of course, these companies would have to carry out this assurance, and of course, this will be carried out by a third-party provider. So, as long as the jurisdiction in question has similar rules as we would have here for the auditors or the independent assurance services providers, those would work as well. So, in that regard, depending where that company comes from, all these rules that you just mentioned would be already sufficient to comply with the European rules. So there is a framework, legally speaking, that already allows for that interoperability in very broad terms, in the sense of the assurance provisions, for instance. And as regards disclosures and any other rules, of course, we are very much following what's happening out there. And in a way, as you can tell, some countries are even going a bit further than others. China is looking into impact materiality as well, and there's also something to make us, think about what we're doing here and where we want to go.
Adrian, how are we looking on the international stage? I mean, other countries face the same political strains as we do, to different degrees in different places. What do you think about in terms of, are we on the right track?
I think we are trying. I think that at least now we are trying to fix some things to do it better. On the positive side of this, I think the center of gravity of policy objectives has shifted from sustainability to competitiveness. And at the same time, we are still pushing for actually use that sustainability as a competitive edge worldwide. But to do that, we need also to see the numbers and to realize that we have to do this fast. And then I'm going to take a couple of data that I read this morning, because when it comes to green bonds, for instance, in 2023, half of the world green bonds that were issued were European. But that same very year, the European Union internal market lost 23% of foreign direct investment. 23%. And the US went up by 8%. If you take the internal market weight on international economy, in less than 15 years, we have gone from 25% of the world economy to 15%. In 15 years. So if we want to do that competitive edge on sustainability, if we want to set the standards of the others, we need to be economically strong. And for that, we need to be quite ambitious on what are we going to actually allow our companies to do. And I think that's the core problem that we're discussing, not only on this file, but on many others. And last but not least, we have to see this commission, how brave are they going to be? Because it's not easy. It's not easy for the president of the commission to change her legacy of the last 5 years in such a dramatic way. So in that sense, that's why we have to work, and our goal, at least from my political group, is to keep that European majority to try to deliver. But again, I am not optimistic in the sense of people not reading what is happening in the world, what is happening in the European societies. And if we don't manage to push this forward in October, so in 30 days, we are going to have heavy, heavy political consequences in Brussels, and I don't think most of the people foresee that.
Well, I see here a comment rather than a question from an audience from Ala Jurgensen saying, isn't the real problem that governments have failed to make sustainability reporting economically viable for enterprises, for example, by reducing the obligations, lowering their tax burden or reporting obligations? Yeah, I think we've covered that quite a lot, Ala. But let me come back, Gemma, to you with the question on how are we competing on an international level, along with any examples you have.
Sure. So, as Elena was mentioning, when we created the first set of sustainability reporting standards, we did not start from scratch. So we looked at what it was already there. So for impact materiality, GRI, for financial materiality, back at the time it was TCFD, the one that was more developed. And then we also looked at the EU laws that we had at the time, right? Because that was very important to not create something from scratch, but just to make sure that this was part of the public policy objectives of Europe. So we have a number of conversations. There's an international meeting today in London with the other standard setters and Asia, India, America. So we have ongoing contact with them because for us, as Ryan was saying, interoperability is part of the mandate from the commissioner, and we do that. And China is a really good example. And the role of financial institutions that probably we could emphasize a little bit more today, it's even more critical because sometimes, and of course, financial institutions are, responsible to comply with the sustainable finance package in Europe, and this is also subject to Omnibus, but even for their own profit margins in the medium and long term, sustainability information of companies actually helps them. And one of the challenges that we will have, after looking at all the respondents now is understanding if, there's certain pieces of information which are actually deleted, and there may be a good reason for that because we are not saying that it may not. Financial institutions will continue asking for that. And that's some of the conversations that we had when we went to some of these national events in Spain or in the Netherlands last week. So that's finding the challenge. But maybe something that Mr. Vasquez said, and I think it's important that to remind ourselves, because this is actually as part of our compass when we are at EFRAG, this is a new ecosystem, sustainability reporting. You have different forces. You have the regulation, you have the companies and the market practice, and then you have the auditors and supervisors. And finding the balance as to what it has to be in which part, right? Whether, we need to actually not include certain disclosures or certain methodology because market practice will lead the way. It's actually the discussions that we're having at EFRAG. And I completely agree with him that this is extremely important. So Omnibus is great because for the first time, I don't know whether it's the first time in general, but that for us, definitely at EFRAG, we have the best field test that one could have. So companies, and I'm just referring to listed companies, really big companies, reported under the ESRSs. So when it comes to sit down with them and say, okay, what worked and what didn't work, they know straight away. And this is the opportunity that we have to capitalize.
Adrienne, a question here from Louis Simon saying that you mentioned the center of gravity has moved from sustainability to competitiveness. Do these seem contradictory to you? Do they not go hand in hand, and are they not the two sides of the same coin?
It depends. because the problem with sustainability and competitiveness is there is a really blurred line between actually make it a competitive edge or completely the opposite. So it's really blurred. And this is a perfect piece of legislation that shows this. And companies can actually explain it. So the thing is, we have to make it a competitive edge because it's one of the few things that we can actually be better than the others. And Denmark is a good example, if you see how they have changed to this green economy. But the problem is when you go too far because you legislate based on ideology and not when you can, then the result is this, and this big mess that we are in now.
Geraldine, do you want to come in on this question of sustainability and competitiveness being the same side of the one coin?
I think it's to put sustainability as, you know, when you get more sustainable, you get less competitive is wrong. I think the industries, I'm not talking about the reporting and the bureaucracy, I'm talking about industries that are effectively working to become more sustainable, again, in the management system, in the supply chain, in the way they produce goods. It's often a source of savings. So if you take renewable energies in most cases, you get it cheaper. If you take waste to heat the kiln of your cement plant instead of pet coke and fuel, you're making great savings. So it is strategic because it can increase your competitiveness effectively by getting more sustainable. And this is the way I believe that we have to go and promote, is really getting things down to earth with subject matter experts, so that not experts in financial reporting, they're experts in assurance, down into the plant, in the field, about the process and how it goes and how you can make it better. We're having the real impact. Because that, at the end of the day, what the citizen wants to hear, the investor wants to hear, and the company itself, because it can help us to reduce the cost. So it is strategic. And when it's embedded into effectively the strategic plan of the company to become more competitive, that's a win.
Elena, you agree with this? Have you a comment?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's very little to add. In the end, all this exercise will also help companies themselves in reassess the internal processes and use the information to evolve. So it's also used for internal purposes throughout the exercise of putting together the information. Again, it's not only about compliance. So yeah, I agree with both.
Another audience question. Is the EU hoping that the finance and insurance sector will fund the transition towards net zero or sustainable development goals? If so, wouldn't they need the original ESRS data points based on double materiality? Who would like to take that question?
Who is the EU exactly? So I leave the Commission.
Elena, I'll let you tackle it.
I mean, I think it's a very similar question to the one on data. So the same reply applies. Again, it's two sides, the given and the receiving, right? So it's not that by making all the information available, then investors can act. There's also some action that is needed from the investor side, and there's some further engagement that will be needed. And again, to see the competitive advantage and the opportunities of that would also trigger that companies provide the information. So we do need to create the ecosystem so that everyone feels that this is an opportunity and that they voluntarily take that step. Because indeed, we've reduced the scope, so mandatorily there will be less companies reporting. Again, investors' interest in ESG hasn't decreased, quite the opposite. So the business case is there, but of course it's for companies to realize. And again, there's all the different measures that could accompany the whole framework that could help. Sadly, many of them are not an EU competence, they are at national level, like taxation, for instance. So it's a bit difficult to get our hands in there, let's put it this way.
Radwin, you very deftly and definitely threw that one to Elena, but I'm going to push you on it. If we're talking about funding the aspirations of net zero and sustainable goals, who does finance it? Where does that come down? Leaving aside, if you like, the politics of it, what's your in-principle thought?
Well, more than who is going to lead the solution. And it's a pity because now we see that we are farther away than 5 years ago to try to put a possible solution on track. And what is true is amazing how most of European societies, I would say 90-80%, we realize day after day how things must be fixed and put on track when it comes to fight it. But at the same time, we are more and more alone in the world when we want to tackle this. So the only way to actually push this forward is to keep to being a strong house and to keep to be an economy powerhouse.
Yeah, no, I fully agree with that. I would just add that when companies do pledge, there has been a lot of pledge to net zero by 2030, 2040, 2050. And investors want to make sure this is going to happen. For some of them who wants to invest in companies wants to get the assurance again that there is a right actions and process that are ongoing in that direction. So here again we come into play as testing, inspection, certification companies, because we do the certification of offset. We do also for carbon credits. We have set up this market of ETS in Europe, which says, hey, you emit CO2, you pay for it, which is, I think, quite powerful, has been copied in a lot of other countries in the world. So we have here a great message, great positioning as Europe, but we need companies like the TIC companies to ensure that effectively this is a reality, that effectively the pledge on net zero is going to happen. So this is where, again, you need assurance that there is a positive impact on that direction, on the field again.
And Gemma, I mean, let me bring you in on your thoughts on this. I mean, are there lessons learned from first ESRS reporting that we could apply here, I mean, when we look to the future?
Plenty. and this is a beautiful thing. Maybe on financial services, where I spent a bulk part of my career before joining EFRAG. I think that there's two things that we have to acknowledge. One is that talking as a third-party entity about insurance and banks, at the end of the day, may not be a good idea, because we are all retail investors. We all have, in one way or another, a pension plan. So when we talk about them, it's actually us, because we are actually the retail, the retail investors. And then secondly, I think that something that it's also going to be looked at by the Commission is the whole education and training to these retail investors, to the people on the street, because that's actually something else that is important, because as Elena said, people care about ESG investments. They want to know whether in their portfolio they have old companies or not. But this is also something that, again, different people will have different sensitivities, and we all have to respect that.
I'm just going to read out the final two questions I see here from the audience before I go for a final round of everyone. You can take the opportunity either to reply to those questions or give us your thoughts on the future. Bonnie Brooke is saying, please consider the 1.5 degree limit and the planetary boundaries. If some requirements are relaxed, how would they be compensated? And Charlotte from SEDEX is asking, is there a risk that businesses in the scope of CSRD would then exclude SMEs from their supply chain because they can't ask them for the data they need on risks and impacts, and inadvertently reduce competitiveness? It's an interesting point worth considering. Elena, I'm going to ask you you can tackle those as you wish, but also tell us a little bit about your final takeaway thought as well.
Well, first of all, I think we need to indeed remember that this is a framework about transparency, which fits indeed within a bigger framework within the Green Deal and the EU priorities and the need to transition to a more sustainable economy. But we are not obliging anyone to do anything. So, this makes the information available, but having less information out there doesn't mean that we are not acting on limiting how we jeopardize and use too much the planetary boundaries or don't align with 1.5. This is about transparency. So again, it is about putting the right tools out there so that decisions can be informed by whoever the stakeholder is that is taking those decisions. Only indirectly this information would serve public authorities in a way to see whether we are going down the right path. But it's not the main purpose of the legislation in itself, and that we also need to keep in mind. There are other legislation to tackle those issues, also very important, and maybe also those that have created a bit of backlash, by the way. So again, not all of this noise is coming from reporting. If it was, it would be very easily resolvable, but there's many other legislation that has caused a bit of nervousness in different sectors. So that one. And in terms of the trickle-down effect, I think that in any case, as Adrian was mentioning, in many member states, SMEs are basically what constitute the economy of those countries. So I think it's very difficult to think that they would just be excluded from supply chains because they're just the only options that are in many cases available. And again, the whole framework, the idea is to construct it and build it in a way that works. So if the information requests are limited to what's in the voluntary standard that the Commission would adopt as a delegated act, if the proposal is adopted as per Commission's proposal, then the idea is that that information in that voluntary standard would be enough to meet the reporting requirements. So again, it wouldn't be a consequence of the reporting framework. If a company privately, for whatever reason, needs more information and wants to ask for more, that's not something we can or should control or limit. It's probably not even legally possible according to company law, right? So this is really a different point, and we don't see a big risk in that regard. We want to just have all the, let's say, measures to make it very clear that what is found in that voluntary standard should be enough to meet the ESRS rules. And by introducing this shield, we kind of reinforce that message in a way. Concluding remarks, I think everything has already been said. We very much keep in mind and keep at the center companies in this exercise. I think everyone can see that from the work that EFRAG has already been doing this month, and by the way in which we have put together the Omnibus proposal in such a short period of time. Again, investors community is still super important, and this information do serve a purpose, but companies should also be at the core, because if we don't have a robust economy, there's not sustainable or not sustainable. So we do need the basis to have solid companies and an ecosystem, so that we can then build from there and have rules that are proportionate and that serve their purpose in the correct way.
Gemma, let me go to you for your closing thoughts or your wrap-up key takeaway from our discussion today.
Sure. Just very briefly also on the SME, I think it's important to notice as well that in the amended reporting standards, as which actually only operate not as a checklist, but when something is material for a company, but let's keep that discussion for another day. There's a lot of reliefs in terms of when companies should be actually reporting on their information. And we have reliefs which are bigger than what we have in the ISSB, the international standards. It's called undue cost and effort, and it would probably be the equivalent of pragmatism in some cases, as Mr. Vasquez was mentioning. So maybe the closing remark would be that we know it's a journey. I think that maybe one of the expectations had been that everything would be perfect in 1 year. Maybe, there was a lot of nitty-gritty and rigid methodology, and this is actually something that we are changing, because at the end of the day, this is a framework. So some companies will use it as a communication tool to explain how they're actually taking sustainability in their business models. Others will probably see it as a compliance exercise, and we need to make sure that we cater for a framework that could be interpreted from both ends, whilst keeping, standardized and comparable information.
Adrian, to you, I mean, if we're agreeing that clear rules are to Europe's competitive advantage, you have given us a lot of cause for concern over the timelines and what may happen with a political side. But what might be a potential outcome? What might be a good outcome if such a thing is reachable with a majority in Parliament?
First of all, a small anecdote when it comes to SMEs, to the second question. When I was discussing with the previous Commissioner of Justice before the piece of legislation came to the Parliament, I was chair of the committee, so I discussed with him a lot on how this legislation should go through. And one of the things I told him is you cannot put on SMEs a burden of going through tons of compliance. You can do a contractual cascade, you can do different things, but don't put the burden on them, because this is going to fire back. And actually it happened. And when it came, I told to my team, go through all the whereas international treaties, national, European and international compliance, SMEs should go through if the directive goes as it is from the Commission. And count how many pages they will have to go through. It was 360,000 pages. And I'm not a performer. I'm a serious politician. But I was tempted to tell to my team, get 2 trolleys and put 360,000 pages on those 2 trolleys and take them to the negotiation room. I was this close to do that.
That wouldn't have been very sustainable.
I know. No, because I was not going to print them. I was going to get the white ones, of course. I'm green at the end of the day. But then, to final conclusion. So, the EPP and Jorgen, they are doing their best to keep the pro-European majority. First time in history that Parliament has an alternative majority, as you may know. First time in history that can be a majority to the right. The problem is that if the left groups push EPP to a no deal, with the right, we don't have a deal possible. It's kill it. It's kill the whole thing. And that's the problem. And this is what we are facing now. So now negotiations are apart, but the good thing is we are still negotiating. So I want to be optimist that on October 13 and then October 23rd in plenary, we'll manage to have a deal. Because the no deal, beyond the consequences for companies on Omnibus I, a no deal in this piece of legislation is going to set the tone for the rest of the mandate. And that will mean that we'll have a broken Parliament.
Geraldine, final wrap up from you. I think you've made a lot of your points very clearly, but one takeaway that you would like us to bear in mind.
Yes, thank you. And I'd like to come back on the point of the SMEs, or the small and medium size enterprise, and just to maybe bounce back on the remarks of Gemma and the EFRAG. Well, now it's better because we are relieving them from reporting because they're too small. I think let's work hand in hand, because the main business of tech companies are SMEs. We do have already embedded, and we're doing an enormous amount of certification, again, of ISO 14000, which is the standard on environment, ISO 50000, which is a standard on energy and energy reduction. So why don't we work hand in hand between EFRAG and ISO, just to, instead of, oh, it's too complicated for them, let's relieve them from that, instead of, no, they're doing it a great job, and if we can just, partner hand in hand, we can embed the SMEs into the global framework, and without altering competitiveness, but with even reinforcing it. So this is a call for simplification, more transparency, more inclusion of all we got already. And then as a final remark, I think I would, after promoting all our industry testing, inspection, certification, but as a matter of fact here, it's just factual, everything I mentioned. I just want to come to what is our identity. In SGS, our motto is when you need to be sure. So we help our customers to be sure on their sustainability journey, among others. And I would like it to conclude by that. It's about trust.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you indeed to all our panelists and to the audience for joining us and for all your questions. Remember, do stay tuned to Euractiv for many more debates on the topics of sustainability, competitiveness, and indeed the Omnibus package. And you can continue the conversation on the social media of your choice using the hashtag EA Debates. That's it for now. Thank you for joining us.